We all have that friend who wakes up early to go get everyone McDonald's breakfast, while the rest of us sleep in. This is your sign to thank them. And if you're that friend, this is us saying thank you.
Just a friendly reminder that right now, get any size iced coffee before 11 a.m. for just 99 cents. And a satisfying sausage McMuffin with egg is just $2.79. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Weather Call Services. Don't be caught off guard by severe weather. Choose Weather Call.
Hello once again, everybody. I'm meteorologist Sean Sublett, and welcome to Across the Sky. It's our national Lee Enterprises weather podcast. Lee Enterprises has digital and print news operations in more than 70 locations across the country, including at my home base in Richmond, Virginia. I'm joined this week by Matt Hollander in Chicago, Kirsten Lang in Tulsa, and of course our buddy Joe Martucci at the Jersey Shore, back from a little time overseas. Now, Joe, you were out of town, but while you were gone, it was a very busy time for tornadoes back here in the States, especially the plains and the Midwest. So I want to talk with Kirsten and Matt about that over the last couple of weeks. Starting with you, Kirsten, what's it been like? Because it was very bad just north of Tulsa recently.
Yeah, just north of Tulsa, we had what was confirmed an EF4 tornado that came through. And that day, there were a lot of eyes on that day. And I think people were ready for this, something to break. But you're never really ready, right? I mean, something like that pops up and it was a serious tornado. It's still picking up the pieces from that. It's been relatively quiet, but this podcast, of course, is going to be dropping Monday, and there's already a chance for storms again Monday here in Tulsa. So we'll see what this afternoon and evening bring. But it's EF4, big deal, big story around here, and a lot of people unfortunately lost a lot that day in Bardsdall and up towards Bartlesville, Oklahoma.
Yeah, what stands out to me is just how there really hasn't been a break since Friday, April 26th, when we had the tornadoes in Nebraska. And what stood out to me about that day was how, and I hate to use this term, but photogenic the tornadoes were, the images of those tornadoes, partly because it happened in the plains where it's flat. It happened during the day rather than nighttime tornadoes, and they were strong, big tornadoes, not the kind of tiny, it's like, is it touching the ground or not? No, it was very clear these tornadoes were touching the ground, and they were just, the classic tornadoes that people think of. You think of the movie Twister, and when you think of a tornado, like the images that came out from that day were what you think of when you think of tornadoes, how photogenic were. But really what's remarkable to me, we know this time of year is severe weather season. It peaks in May, and we get a lot of severe weather. But I am surprised over this 2-week stretch how there really hasn't been a break. There's been a threat of severe storms every day. And what's also even more remarkable than that, not just a small chance of severe storms, but how many days there have been with a high chance of severe storms, and lots of damaging run reports, and lots of hail reports, and lots of tornadoes, not just a couple isolated, but outbreak level with many severe thunderstorms occurring. So it has been a stretch this couple weeks.
Yeah, and I would say that, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but last year this time, it's always kind of busy, but to have it go this long without a legitimate break, the weather pattern remains very active, conducive to severe weather, probably into at least the first part of next week, if not a little bit longer. So it remains top of mind, and it probably is going to continue to be so for a while. So with that, we wanted to bring in Jennifer Narramore, meteorologist and founder of Tornado Talk. That is a site that details the history and human impacts of tornadoes in the U.S. Now, Jennifer is a meteorologist from Penn State and has also been working as a radio broadcast meteorologist for more than 20 years, and you will often find her across the weather podcast space, over down the dial, as they say, at Weather Brains. So to put the recent tornadoes into a little bit of a historical perspective, here's our conversation with Jennifer Narramore.
Welcome to another round of Boardroom or Miro Board. Today we talk retrospectives with Agile coach Maria. Let's go. First question. You've spent 2 hours in a team retro, but the only input you've heard is Dave's. Boardroom or Miro Board?
Boardroom. In Miro, Dave can't hog the space because everyone can add thoughts anonymously, online, at the same time.
Correct. Next. You need the team to act on feedback fast, so you turn all those retro notes into Jira tasks instantly.
Miro all the way. And I can assign those tasks to teammates.
You're nailing this. Now, you see hundreds of sticky notes from the retro. A real mess. But you organize them into 5 themes in just seconds.
Miro, I basically get back an entire hour when I use its AI tools for clustering.
And she's done it.
Join over 60 million people running actually enjoyable and actionable retros in Miro. Get your first 3 boards free at Miro.com. That's Miro.com.
Jen, thanks for joining us today. Tornadoes are all over the place, it seems, the last couple of weeks. You're doing the regular radio forecasts in addition to Tornado Talk. So for people who aren't familiar with Tornado Talk, walk them through what this is all about.
Absolutely. Yeah, Tornado Talk is my baby. I love the brand. I love what we're doing with it. And it actually started in 2016 as a podcast. And I was working with the owner of the Storm Report Radio Network, who I worked with, Dan Holliday, and he wanted to start this podcast. So I was the co-host, and we did 36 amazing episodes. And we kind of did some old time radio, adding music and stories and interviews and what have you. And I was the person who got the interviews, and I was the person who did the research on the event. And we did 36 episodes, and then he decided to step away, but I had fallen in love with all these stories. So I decided to move Tornado Talk into more of an oral history direction. And from late 2017 through the next couple of years, I almost focused it on like on this day blog, what happened on this day in tornado history. And there were quick things. I wrote them all by myself. And then I almost quit because I couldn't figure out what to do next, spending all my money. I'm like, do I do something more with this? And in 2020, where did we find ourselves? Stuck. We couldn't go anywhere. I found myself stuck in a Discord server that we had created to talk to folks about tornado history. And the next thing I know, all these people were showing up and they knew all these events, and it just grew from there. And in 2021, a couple of writers and I that I found through the Discord server began writing on the 2011 super outbreak. And it's grown from there to focus on the 1974 super outbreak. And from that point, I have 2 amazing writers and researchers that work with me to produce very in-depth stories on what happened in tornado history. And we take the event from the beginning of the path to the end, what was hit, what communities were impacted, who were the people. And I've challenged both of the guys that if there were fatalities in the event that we're writing about, we want to know the names of the folks who died because we want to honor their lives. And every story has an in loving memory section. And then we try to find the hero stories. And then we always try to wrap things up with how did the communities rebuild? And the stories sometimes are similar, but sometimes they're different. And you can find out how some communities never did rebuild. And some still have the scars to this day, even decades later. But then we try to find out, how did they rebuild? And so we try to tell those stories and just encompass it in a big package like that.
All right. So one of the biggest outbreaks, I think, historically, we as meteorologists, we think about the super outbreak in 1974. Yeah. My understanding is you've been working on a much larger term project about the super outbreak in 74, 50th anniversary of that. How is that project coming along?
It's overwhelming. It's way bigger than I could even have imagined. We decided in the fall, or I guess it was the early part of spring 2023, to try to figure out how we were going to try to do this. There were 148 tornadoes that occurred in that 24-hour period, and our goal was to try to find 40 of those tornado events to write about. And we've embarked upon 3 separate traveling trips to go to libraries, research centers, history centers, to go to city centers. We visited the city of Guin, who was hit with an F5 on that day. And so we just went and visited all these folks to get information locally. You can find a lot of information online through newspapers.com or archives, but then there's a lot of things that you can't find unless you actually go to the place and visit. And our first trip was in March of 2023, and it was my main writer, Nelson Tucker, who's a student at Millersville University. He took his spring break to come with me, to travel throughout parts of southern Indiana and to Kentucky. And we started going to all these different places. And we, at that point, deemed what we were doing was chasing tornado history. So we are chasing, but we're doing tornado history instead, and overwhelmed with the amount of information that we found, images, photos of damage, photos of tornadoes, newspapers that you can't find online. And all of these are like little nuggets of amazing information to tell these stories that we're wanting to tell. And we then in August went to Alabama. Got a little distracted at Alabama because not only were we looking at and going to places from 1974, but also 2011. We went to a few spots for that as well. And then this past March, we focused mainly in Ohio to cover Xenia. And that's a little closer to home for me, so we could, I could get down there a little bit quicker. And we made several trips to Xenia to start getting that information. So we have currently written one major summary series for the Frankfort, Kentucky F4. And we did an overview that's free to the public. And then it's 11 chapters that we are Patreon supported at this point. And so the Patreon supporters can see the more in-depth stuff. And then right before the anniversary, we completed a humongous overview of the Guin F5 and then the Xenia F5 as well. And that Xenia F5 summary ended up being 15,000 words. And we're not even remotely done yet with the amount of imagery that we can present. And we do things more than just, here's a story. We back up all the stories with images, damage photos, people photos, tornado photos. We do maps that are very detailed. We get satellite imagery thrown in as well. And it's a balance between the weather story and the people story as well. And the research continues. I just got back from a trip where I went solo to about 6 libraries in Indiana to look at information for some of the other tornadoes. The Hamburg F4 actually drove to Hamburg, and there's one gasoline sign that's still standing. The gasoline station was wiped out, but that sign is still there after the tornado. So I took, and I'm like, those are just interesting things to me to find, and just amazing stuff to talk to folks. And then I love microfilm, so I was in there with the microfilm machine for hours in some of these libraries. So that's where we're at, and we're going to continue to kind of build on those stories, and it's a multi-year project. We never imagined that we would be so overwhelmed. And the hardest part, guys, is trying to figure out how you organize it all. I mean, it's so much stuff. How do you organize it? How do you put it in folders? How do you, figure out what you have so you can tell the stories? And it's a lot, but it's been so amazing. So amazing. And we've met so many amazing people.
And obviously there's so many stories, but I want to focus on those people stories. Is there one that really stands out to you? A story about a person or a family from the 74 tornado outbreak that really stands out to you that you would want to share with the audience?
So far, I would say the most impactful story to me actually came from the Guin, Alabama path, which is one of the longest paths of the outbreak. And when we went to Guin, we went to see the city hall, and they laid out all the materials for us, and it was amazing. We met the mayor, and it was just great. And then we traveled, but it was more than just Guin that was hit. There were outskirts, beyond to the northeast that were hit as well. And this small community called the Berry community, there was a family that was impacted in their home. And when we traveled to, we left Jasper, Alabama, and we traveled up into, I think it was Winston County. And we went to the archives there. There was a little lady that was sitting there wanting to talk to us. And I was running late. I felt awful because I'm a talker, and I was talking in Jasper, and I got just caught up talking to this lady, and then we got behind, and then we showed up, and I was apologizing, and she had sat there for 45 minutes waiting to speak to us. And I ran the recorder on her, and her name's Bessie Berry, and she was a survivor of the 1974 Guin tornado, and she just told her whole story, and she was the sweetest lady. And her, they all made it, or at least were trying to get to the cellar. And then the tornado hit, and it was her and her husband, and then her mother-in-law, and then her 2 daughters. And the mother-in-law was coming down, and the tornado hit, and then she was knocked down by debris. And then her daughter, oldest daughter, was near her and was injured as well. And the mother-in-law passed away. And so she's telling the story, and then she started crying, and she was really struggling, and it just showed the impact 50 years later. And the thing that was most impactful for her was the fact that her daughter, because of the tragedy of watching her grandmother die right in front of her eyes and go through this tragedy, she goes, my daughter never really recovered. She never really got over that. And her daughter had since passed away before Bessie. And she goes, I think she held on to that pain for her entire life, and she just never got over it. And you can see the emotion in her telling the story. And I was so honored that she opened her heart to us to tell her story. And I said, Miss Bessie, can I give you a hug? And she just gave me this biggest hug, and she was so sweet. And that story stuck with me. And we do highlight in our duet, and I do a little clip from the recording so you could hear her voice. She was so precious, and the fact that she waited for us was meant so much to me. And these are the stories that I want to tell. I mean, these are people, and the thing for her, and I said, Miss Bessie, do you mind if we share your story? And she goes, no, I want my story told. People want to be heard, and they want to be remembered. And these events have such an impact on their lives. And so that's what we want to try to do. We want to remember these folks. You know, everyone knows Gwen, but do you know what happened beyond Gwen? Because the tornado went 90 some miles. So do you know what happened beyond?
Hey, Jen, it's Joe. So, you know, you go on your Tornado Talk website and you see summaries for really any state in the country. You know, what makes you want to go to a certain location? What are the logistics at the planning this? Like, do you know who you're talking to ahead of time? Do you kind of figure it out as you go there? What's the logistics going into one of these trips if you do go out, you know, and venture out there?
That's a great question. Yeah, there are a lot of logistics and a lot of organizing that goes into it, because we're trying to pack in a lot to maximize our time within about a week. And so for that first trip last March of 2023, we ended up visiting about 22 places in a week. And we were, boom, going to the next place, boom, to the next place. And I had to make phone calls prior to that to find out, will the place be open? What are their hours? Do they have any information that would be helpful to us? We went to some universities, like to the University of Kentucky Archives. What are the protocols of getting in? You know, all that kind of stuff. And so there were a lot that goes into it. And you have to create a very detailed itinerary to try to get through. And I told Nelson on that first trip, I said, dude, we hope there's no weather, because we got to get to the next place pretty quick. We had a little bit of weather to deal with before we got there, and we had a lot of weather to deal with when we went to Alabama. But, you know, you just go and do the best you can. In Alabama, we did have to cancel a couple of our trips, because sometimes you get places and they have way more information than you thought. And we call that overperforming. You know, do we say that? We see that with weather events, right? Weather events underperform or overperform. It's the same way with gathering materials for history. You might go someplace and you slate like 2 hours at a library, but then they've got so much stuff. We went to Brandenburg, and the library there had oodles of pictures in a plastic bag in a drawer. And we're like, oh my goodness. I mean, some people don't realize the gem of information that they have. And so we then will go and take photos of photos and scan things and save, you know, microfilm clips on. And so we get into a routine with it. And that first trip was a little bumpy. We had a lot going on. We left stuff at libraries and had to go back and get it. I had to have my iPad shipped to me, because you just get a little bit out of your routine, and you're in a hurry to get to the next place. And it went a little bit more smoothly in August. But for every trip I take, even I've made some trips up here in Ohio. I'm writing a summary from 1937 from a tornado that hit Athens, Ohio. And I've been down there 3 times to meet some of those folks and to talk through what happened. And I've really gotten kind of attached to that community too. But even for that, I've made contacts. You call and you make plans to try to because you want to maximize the time that you have. And, you just never know who you're going to meet along the way.
So Jen, what, and I apologize if you said this earlier, but what when you're looking, there's so many tornadoes obviously in history. What made you decide which ones to cover first, and how many do you usually kind of bump out, I guess, in, let's call it, a month's time?
The three of us who do the writing and research right now are perfectionists. And I told them, I said, we're going to have to knock that off because it's taking 8 years to try to get, I said, we're never going to get done with the 74 project. I'll be dead before we're even done at this rate. But the problem is that there's so much information. This whole going on trips thing is brand new. That is just a year or so in the process, and we did not realize. But prior to that, we were able to knock out like some of the 2011 stuff fairly quickly because there's so much more that's online, and we were able to work more efficiently, it seemed like, because we didn't have to travel and get some of the information for that and organize it. Everything was in front of us. And so we were able to crank out some of our events, like the one we did for Wren, Mississippi. I think we cranked that out within a week, and it's very detailed. And so, but the one that we did for Frankfurt for 1974, that took months. Then we got into a little bit of routine for the Guin overview. That took, I think, about 6 weeks or so. And then Xenia, we did super fast, I think, because it was fresh in our mind, and it took maybe 10 days to crank that out. That is not typical. I mean, that did wear us out because we want to try to get as much information out as we can, but we want to get the history right. So we're very careful and meticulous, and we have a huge routine on, okay, break down the research. What are we going to focus on? Who are the people's stories? We map it out, and then we go through the writing and the imagery and captions and maps, and then we have to review it. And I call it story time with Jen, where I read it out loud, because you can hear mistakes more if you read it out loud than if you're just reading it in your own head. So we'll have story time with Jen, we'll review it, and then it has to get on the website. And that can take quite a long time to do as well. So I would say that if we're doing shorter summaries, we can get stuff out in a couple of days. If it's the longer thing and we're really diving deep, it could take much longer.
All right, Jen, we're going to take a little break. We'll come back. I want to talk about a few more of these stories from other different historical outbreaks. When we come right back with Jennifer Narramore of Tornado Talk on the Across the Sky podcast.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Weather Call Services. Don't be caught off guard by severe weather. Choose Weather Call. Receive precise, location-specific alerts via phone, text, or email. With over a decade of experience, Weather Call delivers pinpoint accuracy for your exact address, ensuring no surprises. Take charge and stay prepared when ominous skies loom. Explore the Weather Call difference today. Visit weathercallservices.com/Lee-Enterprises and safeguard yourself, your business, or any school that matters to you. That's weathercallservices.com/Lee-Enterprises. You can also find the link in our show notes.
And we're back on the Across the Sky podcast with Jennifer Narramore of tornadotalk.com, getting all we need to know about tornado history, more than just the science, but truly the human impacts of tornadoes, not just at the moment or the week afterwards, but long after the tornadoes are gone. Jennifer, one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, what really either surprised you, caught you off guard, or wowed you as you got more and more into this? As meteorologists, we know that there's an impact intellectually. But as you got deeper into this, what kind of stuck with you the most or surprised you the most through all of this research?
Couple of things, Sean. First of all, I have been overwhelmed with the amount of people that are into tornado history. And it's not just that they watch videos, tornado classics or whatever from Thomas Bruzoulis, but they all own the Significant Tornadoes book, or the Big Green Book. They all were waiting for the Big Blue Book to come out. And these are not, people my age in their 50s, these are young kids in their teens and 20s who love, and they can know the event. They can sit here and tell you the year, the rating, the path, what it hit, and they know the information. And so that has been something that has been so neat to see, and I have really been able to learn from these kids about tornado history, and then their enthusiasm for it. It's been amazing. But then outside of that, what I've really been struck by is the interest in tornado history by libraries, history centers, archives, city governments, and especially going to some place like Guin, where, you know, their whole town was wiped out by an F5. And they embrace that. They're not afraid of it. And what they did is they bettered themselves for it. And so they embrace their history. And I think there's a lot of folks that are doing that more than we know. And people love history. And I really, truly feel that by learning from the past, you can prepare for now and the future. And Sean, you were a part of the Mid-Atlantic Chaser Conference back in November, and I spoke there about the Moore 2013 tornado. And it had more of an impact than I even remotely imagined it could have. And because what I did is I took people through essentially a tornado talk summary, and I started at the beginning of the path and I did a PowerPoint, and then at the end, and it was not only more, but it was also the El Reno. I did a 5-minute video, and it was just music, and it had the names and photos of everyone who had passed away. I had a lot of people, because we're seeing this conference and others like it have meteorologists, National Weather Service employees, broadcasters, climatological folks, chasers. They all come together, and I had so many people come to me and say, thank you so much for reminding us of why we do what we do. And so in that, it really brought home that we are in the now here as meteorologists. You know, we're doing forecasts, and we're, you know, maybe looking at a little bit of the past or the current, but then we're what's the next storm? What are we trying to help people with next? And then we forget that there are people that are impacted by these storms, and that they all have a story. And so I think I've been overwhelmed as well, just the reception that we've received, that people want to know more about these stories, and that has had an impact on the weather enterprise, and also history and libraries. And people are like, thank you so much for sharing. And one last thing that just popped in my mind, we had folks where we've written a story, and they've written to us and said, thank you so much for writing about my great-grandfather. Or I was the person who you wrote about, who was with my grandfather, and my grandfather died. Will you please, I would love to tell you my story. And that was Junction City, Arkansas. The kid there, he told us his story. So people are reading it, and they're so grateful that we're telling their story, and then they want to add to it. So this is a growing database. I think this will be around forever, and we're going to continue to build upon it as people come out and tell their story to add to it. But I've been overwhelmed when we get an email like that. It really warms my heart that we had an impact on somebody.
And Jen, I'm thinking about the forgotten stories, because oftentimes we remember the big outbreaks, like the 2011 outbreak, the 1974 outbreak, and all the stories that come out there. But there are about 1,200 tornadoes that occur in the U.S. every year, and they've all got a story associated with them. Obviously, the bigger tornadoes have more stories associated with them. But what's one story from an event you've covered that probably isn't as well known? Maybe an isolated tornado that wasn't part of a bigger outbreak. What's one story that people might not know about?
In 1971, it was 3 weeks before the Delta outbreak. There was an F2 that went through Mississippi, and we call it the Gore Springs tornado in the summary that we wrote about that. And it was an F2. It traveled just over 6 miles. And this tornado didn't hit a lot, but it hit one trailer in the rural areas of Grenada County. And 7 people died in one trailer, all from one family. And the family was Officer Christopher Columbus Hankins. And he was out and about, coming home from his shift, and had stopped at the grocery store. He was getting, his wife had just had a baby, 5 days old, and he was getting some stuff, and then he was getting some candy for the kids. Now, I know this story more detailed because we talked to him last year. He was, we found his son and made a connection on Facebook, and I said, I would love to talk to your dad if he's willing. And I got on the phone with him and talked to him, and it was an amazing interview, and he was so awesome. And he struggled. He's like, I've really not ever told this story. He lost his entire family that day. And I wrote down, it was his wife, Mary Ellen, their 5-day-old infant, 3-year-old son, Gary, 2-year-old daughter, Lasad Michelle, and then her mother, Ellen. And then also was the sister of Officer Hankins, Laura, and her 4-year-old daughter, Brenda. So they were all killed instantly. And he came home to that scene. And so the son that we met was his second family. And so when I talked to him, and I said, how would you like us to honor your family? And so he wanted their names to be known. And he said, for whatever reason, it wasn't my time that day. And, he tried to have the best outlet that he could, and he continued his life. He had met another woman that was an amazing wife, and he had more kids, and he continued to grow as a police officer. And his outlook was amazing. And I think that I walked away from that and many stories that we've written where these tragedies happen and then people walk away and they try to find the silver lining in the stories, even though this one is one of the most tragic, I think, that I've written. They try to find, the positives to try to move on. And what is my hope is that people would read that story and that they would go, because we're all going through stuff in our lives, no matter what. They're not always tornado events. They're whatever is going on in our lives. We all have stuff that we're dealing with, but to read these stories, to see their attitude and their, for someone who went through it, and how can we learn from them? How can we find the positives in everything that we're going through as well?
Hey, Jen, what are you, what are you hoping to gain in the next, couple of years as you go forward with this? What is next for Tornado Talk as you keep writing these stories and telling people's stories?
Well, we've got a lot of ideas. I'm a dreamer, and I want to write as many stories as humanly possible. And I want this to be a growing database. I want this to be the one of the go-to places that folks come to for tornado history, to read stories and to be able to learn more about different events across the country and internationally. We've done a couple of events in Canada. We actually wrote an event from the Netherlands, which is an awful event where an airplane flew into a tornado and crashed. And the fatalities were from the folks who were in the plane. And then there was one gentleman on the ground who was a firefighter, and he ran to get help and then died of a heart attack. It was just so tragic. But we tackled that event, and there's so many more, even internationally, that we want to try to cover. I do have some ideas of how to, because my ultimate goal is to do Tornado Talk full time. And right now it's hard with I do 70 cities on radio right now, and I want to try to see how I can do Tornado Talk more. But there is a desire to hear these stories. And so you'll hear it here first, a little bit of a tease. I'm working on a program to do Tornado Talks at libraries. And I have some ideas on how to present that. And I've kind of bounced some ideas off of librarians to got to get some thoughts of what they look for, because they're always looking for speakers. And this is a topic that is important to folks. And there's a way, I think, to turn it into not only covering the history, but also the safety. I think people should have weather radios, and some people don't know what a weather radio is. And how can we then talk about, this is what a tornado is, this is the history, but this is the safety. And then, these are the tornadoes that went through your county. And so I'm working on trying to find a way to build that program up. And that's one of my next steps, I think, to try to do. And then right now we are Patreon supported, and we have amazing folks in our community. I hope to continue to keep that going, but we're going to try to just continue to write as many stories as we can. We still have several from the 1974 to cover, and we have a handful from 2011 that we are wanting to try to cover. And we're just going to continue to grow and work on our protocol on how we can continue to write these stories and tell as many as we can to have an impact on. And it's not just the stories, but we're getting some invaluable research that can help the weather enterprise. It's finding out what structures were hit. Was there a school hit? Was there a church hit? That's important to communities. And so if somebody is going and doing a search for their community, they may find that I didn't realize that my school was hit, or, that might have an impact on them as well. So those are important things too. How do we collect some of that data that we're finding? So I see nothing but positive stuff for Tornado Talk. I'm excited about it. I'm excited to work with Zach and Nelson to continue to grow and write these amazing stories and just see what happens next.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, have you had much of an opportunity to do some collaboration with the social science version of the meteorological community and some of the physical science to go back and combine data and combine efforts to merge the physics and the technicality of what happened with the stories yet?
Not really. What we have had an opportunity and to work with, we actually worked a project with NIST, and we were able to do some data with National Institutes for Standards and Technology to talk about structures that were hit and helping them with their growing database of that. And so in that, we were able to look back at some of our information and help enhance their database. And that was really one of the first big collaboration projects that we've been able to work with. And as you know, if you're a Weather Brains fan, everyone knows Kim Clocko-McLean and her social scientists. She's amazing, and she's been helping me a lot to try to figure out. And she firmly believes that what we're doing is huge for social science. And so I've been talking with her more, trying to get some insight on how what we do and what we've come up with a research plan. How can we use that to help the social sciences? So I think there are some ways that we can. It's just trying to more time in the day would help, and maybe just dial down the current tornadoes just a little bit. That would be really great to help, because I get distracted, watching what's happening. But no, I think that there's a lot that we can do, and I would love to collaborate more. And we have great partnerships with the National Weather Service. They are amazing. Rick Smith, Chris Darden down in Birmingham. We've everywhere we've visited on these trips, we try to hit one of the National Weather Service offices. So we've been to the Louisville office, met John Gordon, went to National Weather Service Wilmington back in March. Andy Hatsos and Kristen Cassidy, we met those folks, and they love talking about these events. And then we will work through things and share information, and then they share with us, and that helps them enhance some of their writing, because they're limited on what they can do in terms of, after they do the surveys, sometimes they can go back and look at some of those older events, but they can't go into even remote of the detail that we can. But they care about the people's stories. They want to know, where were people? Did they try to take cover? We can find that out. Or were they on the phone, or did they just stay on the couch, or were they trying to get to the basement? Were they trying to get to a storm cellar? And were they in their car? We can get some of that information through the research that we do.
Yeah, it's so important to keep these stories alive, keep these ideas out there to remind people that the tornadoes aren't just a here and now thing, but they stay with us well after the event is over, and they etch themselves in consciousness for a lifetime. The website is tornadotalk.com. Jen, tell people where else they can find more, the Patreon. Do you still do the Discord server? How can people find out more about Tornado Talk?
Yeah, we are still on Patreon, and we have different tiers. And then the Discord server is alive and well. In fact, if you are a Patreon supporter, you get to be put in your own little Patreon rooms, and those are active. I mean, these folks, and I was in there last night going back and forth about and tracking every tornado that's happening currently. But we are also on Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it these days, Facebook. We are on Blue Sky as well. We do have a YouTube channel. All of the old podcasts, the 36 that we did, are archived there. And I continue to do some This Week in Tornado History stuff as well. And I think that covers it. We try to hit as much. I tried TikTok for like a half a second, and then I'm like, nah, I'm not going to do that right now. You never know. James Spann does it. Maybe I should hop on there too. I mean, he's on everything. But yeah, I think that covers it. But we're the most active, I would say, is on X, and then in our Discord server.
All right, Jen, thank you so much for the work that you do, bringing all these things home, tying it all together, because it's important work. We're very grateful for you for doing it. So we'll let you get back to your day job doing radio weather, and hopefully we will talk with you again soon.
Thank you all so much.
Stay with us. We'll be right back in a moment with some closing thoughts on the Across the Sky podcast.
If you've ever wondered if you can pull off cowboy boots, then you should pull on a pair of Tecovas. Their Western boots for men and women are made by hand in over 200 individual steps from premium bovine and exotic hides and designed to send you off in comfort and a personal style that's all yours to own. From vintage denim to more formal attire, a great pair of boots will elevate a casual look or add a refined flair that'll draw eyes and start conversations. And with other classic Tecova staples like their lineup of denim, apparel, and accessories, you can craft a look that'll put the world at your heels. Pair that with Tecova's signature out-of-the-box comfort, direct-to-consumer pricing, and free shipping and exchanges on all boots. You'll never have to step out wondering if you found your perfect pair, because Tecova's customer service is always at your service. When comfort leads, confidence follows. And Tecovas delivers both right to your door. Visit tecovas.com. That's TECOVAS.com. And don't go gently. You'll love where you're headed.
You know, the thing that gets me about her stories is how impactful they are. We know it's impactful, right? They're tornadoes, and we know that intuitively and intellectually. But you know, she talked about the videos that she's produced. We were at that Mid-Atlantic Storm Conference last fall. I watched those videos. There's not a dry eye in the house. I mean, you know, again, intellectually, how big of an impact these things make on people's lives. But for a lot of people, there's their life before it and then their life after it. And to put that into perspective, it's very challenging. It's important, but difficult. And you can probably tell during the conversation, she's welling up. This is not easy work to do, y'all.
The story about the man who lost his whole family, I mean, that really grabbed me. I that was hard even just to listen. I can't imagine what it was like to actually hear him telling the story, because even just listening to her tell the story, I felt that. I mean, can you imagine going through something like that? And you just wonder. It's so great, I think, this project where she's going back in history and looking at these stories, especially these ones that aren't as well known, and finding these people who have these stories to share. I think it helps them, but also just helps, you know, document this, and so that these people are remembered and not forgotten. And I think, we're guilty of that in the weather business, because so much of our job is forecasting what's next. And sometimes we forget to look back and cover it when it right day after it happens. Here's all the damage. Look at the destruction. But then more storms happen and we move on. But the people that experience that, those communities, it takes them a long time. It's not just a couple of days and they move on. No, they're dealing with it for weeks, months, and years. And following back up with them and checking in on them and see how they're doing and what stories have come up in the aftermath. So I think it's great what she's doing to look back in the past, because I think sometimes in meteorology we don't do that enough.
Yeah, and the other thing too that's nice that she's doing with this is, you know, talking and highlighting the heroes, because there's a lot of people that step in, a lot of people that help out. Those stories of remembrance, but then also the story of those that, you know, really went above and beyond to help out.
Yeah, and, you know, I think we kind of talked about this too. You know, a lot of times we fly in right after the event happens and we're focusing on it and we're talking about the stories. And we're talking about people too who are involved with that. But as time goes, you know, the memory fades, and she's really, you know, she's going back 50 years in some cases, you know, if not even more, to look at this. And it's a good testament to, you know, how we can continue to support journalism. I'd also like to say it's like local journalism, and the fact that she's talking about these stories and these peoples here at a time where local journalism, you know, does have its struggles with getting these stories out about people. So, you know, she might not be doing it traditionally like we are, but she's doing it in a way that is accurate and contrite. It's something that people are enjoying.
And as she mentioned, this is a big help to the social science community, so that we understand the actions that people took back then, what the actions they're taking today, understanding, you know, psychology, sociology a little bit, to improve the way we communicate these hazards, improve the warnings, so people can get out of harm's way a little more easily. So very grateful to her for spending some time with us this week. It's going to be very active next week as well. And next thing you know, it's going to be summer. But before we get to that, let's close up shop a little bit and talk about Across My Sky, because Joe, You just got back from a little overseas trip. So riff a little bit on that, man.
Well, I was just, we were just in the Canary Islands, which is part of Spain. So it is part of the European Union, but it's technically on the African continent. It's just offshore Morocco. It was, the water was fantastic. It could rival anywhere you see, across the globe. The way I like to describe it, and people laugh when I've said this, is it's kind of like as if Hawaii and Nevada had a baby. It has that Hawaii volcanic look to it. There's black sand beaches, and there's really nice beaches, right? Like in Hawaii, but it has that deserty kind of look that Nevada has. I even saw a Hard Rock Cafe there, just like Vegas would have. So it's a good combination of the two. And the climate, I think it's pretty perfect. It's pretty much average high temperatures in the 70s most of the year. July, August, September's in the 80s. Low temperatures average in the 60s. It's really interesting being there, though, because, and this is coming from, if you live in a humid area like New Jersey can be, and, of course, Chicago and Tulsa and Richmond can be, you get those summer mornings and the sun's just starting to cook on your skin. You're like, it's going to be like a high humid day. Well, it does that in the morning, but it never gets like that for the rest of the day. It just stays beautiful. So we were able to go in the water. We went to 2 islands. But I do have some bad news with this. Unfortunately now, I need to use 2 hands to say the number of times I pump my own gas. I had to pump my own gas in Tenerife, and it was heartbreaking. And here was the kicker. We were in Gran Canaria. So we were in 2 islands. We went to Gran Canaria, then we went to Tenerife. We had to, bring the rental car back, so you have to fill it up with gas. So I'm going to Gran Canaria. I'm like, man, this is going to be having to pump my own gas. Here it comes, 2 hands, Joe. Turns out they had full serve there. They pumped their gas for you over there. I went to the next time. I said, wow, I might be dodging a bullet. They didn't dodge a bullet. Had to pump it myself. This is actually twice in 1 year I've had to pump my own gas, and that is a record for your boy. So that's what's happening across the horror.
No Wawas there yet, I'm assuming.
No, there was no Wawas there, although the Disa was nice. Disa gasoline over there in Canary Islands was good. But in all seriousness, if you can go. We did have to get back a day later than we expected. So if connecting a direct flight, do it. But either way, very nice place. The gas horror will live on, and hopefully I just stay on 2 hands.
Kirsten, what's across your sky before you scoot out of here?
Oh, man. I know I mentioned this earlier, but probably just the weather here. I feel like the weather has just been such a talker, and the tornado that happened just north of Tulsa, it was just one of those things you just watch it and, just textbook, right? Just, and it came out ahead of the squall line, and it was just one of those things. And I have a lot of friends, of course, in the news business, and so they've been very busy covering that storm, and it's all over nationally as well. But that's kind of what's been going on here. There's been a little break. This is dropping the day after Mother's Day, so hopefully all of you, got in touch with your mom and told her happy Mother's Day. But yeah, that's about all that's going on in my world.
And yeah, Mother's Day is across my sky too, from a weather perspective, because for a lot of the country, once you get past Mother's Day, it's kind of the end of the threat of cold weather. Now, there are some exceptions. You get up in the mountains out in the west, and I can't believe how we're still talking about snow in places like Montana and Colorado, but mainly at higher elevation. For the vast majority of the country, you usually don't have to worry about any freezes anymore after Mother's Day. And from a Chicago perspective, I think after Mother's Day, this is the start of the nice weather season here in Chicago. The 5 great months from May through September that really make up for the rest of the year in Chicago, where the weather is just fantastic, just amazing. So I'm happy about the unofficial start of summer, Mother's Day.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear. I've got Mother's Day covered. We are taking my mom to a very special Mother's Day brunch. For those familiar with the Richmond, we're going to the Jefferson Hotel, which is like the grand dam of hotels here in Richmond. So we're doing that with Mom this weekend. Whereas last week was Arts in the Park here in Richmond. And for too much longer, the Greek Festival is coming right after Memorial Day. Lots of stuff to get excited about here in the River City. By the way, next week, we tease a couple of things ahead. We've got Jan Dutton from Prescient Weather just up the street in Charlottesville.
PenFed Free Checking offers zero fees and zero balance requirements for zero hassle. PenFed Access America Checking lets you earn money on your balance for dreams big and small. Choose the best account for you and start making the most of your money. Learn more at PenFed.org. Federally insured by NCUA. To receive any advertised product, you must become a member of PenFed Credit Union.
He's going to have our summer outlook and talk about sub-seasonal forecasting. How in the world are we able to figure out what a whole season is going to be like? For Memorial Day, we still got Jen Carfagno on the docket to talk to us about Memorial Day traveling, her road trips, whether it's at Punxsutawney for the groundhog and the party they have there, or all the snow they get in the Sierras. What's it like covering those and grabbing your bags and hustling out to cover that stuff? Getting us into June, Jason Otkin or Oken. Joe, is it Otkin or Oken? Do you know?
I believe it's Oken.
Oken. He's going to join us to talk about flash drought. Everybody knows what flash flooding is, but what's a flash drought? Short version is it gets dry very, very fast, and what are the impacts of that? So we've got a lot coming up. Thank you for joining us this week. We appreciate it so much. For Matt Hollander in Chicago, Kirsten Lang in Tulsa, and Joe Martucci at the beautiful Jersey Shore, meteorologist Sean Sublett in Richmond, Virginia. Thanks for listening to the Across the Sky podcast. We will talk with you next week.
Welcome to another round of Drawing Board or Miro Board. Today we talk brainstorms with UX designer Brian. Let's go. First question. You thought you'd see everyone's idea in the team brainstorm, but you've got a grand total of 1. Drawing board or Miro board?
Drawing board, right? Because in Miro, the team can add ideas now or later. And with privacy mode, we can keep them anonymous until they're good to share.
Correct. Next, you need the best way to explain your idea, but all you have is a few sticky notes. Drawing board or Miro board?
Drawing board, because, in Miro, I could record videos, add text, images, links, and digital sticky notes, of course, present my thoughts the way I want.
Right again. Now, you're looking for a past idea you thought was just genius. Only you could find... Oh, there it is. Drawing board or...
Miro. All our finished and unfinished work lives in one place.
And he's won.
Join over 60 million people getting ideas noticed in Miro brainstorms. Get your first 3 boards for free at Miro.com. That's Miro.com.